Welcome back to the Long Distance Worklife, where we help you lead, work, and thrive in remote and hybrid teams. I'm Marisa Eikenberry, a fellow remote worker, and joining me is my co-host and remote work expert, Wayne Turmel. Hi, Wayne.
Hi, that's me, and also a remote worker, as it turns out.
That is also true. It's part of what makes you an expert. So today we are talking about more pet peeves. And first of all, thank you for so many of you who have been sending us these. We've had so much fun doing them over the last several months. And
I love listening to people whine. That makes me so happy.
And the funny part is some of our listeners have said they enjoy hearing you rant about things. So it's a perfect match, right?
It's a good thing.
Right?
Tell me what you want me to rant about. Bring it.
Well, today we're going to rant about onboarding, and specifically about remote onboarding. So I heard from Katrina on Facebook about onboarding as a fully remote worker into an existing fully remote team is rough. She did it before COVID, before it was fashionable, and it took 4 to 6 weeks before she felt like she didn't just take up space. She's also had 2 peers and 1 supervisor who were all onboarded during COVID that had a tough time with it, and all have since left. And 3 direct reports onboarded as a mostly remote experience, but they had complicated processes for getting access to technology and things of that nature. So far, all 3 direct reports are still here, but as a team, we have to and do work very, very hard to build cohesion and rapport. And we actually had somebody else, Rachel, also on Facebook, who had said that onboarding new team members was very tricky for them, and it was hard to form new and genuine connections. So there are people that are having issues onboarding remotely.
Well, they are, and I am going to be that guy again and remind people that this is not just, gee, it's really hard, and gosh, I'd have liked to have gotten it. There is a business cost here. If people do not feel within the first 5 days a sense of belonging, they are statistically more likely to leave. And remote workers, as we have talked about many times on this show, have no barriers to leaving.
Right. Yeah. They can start the next day in a completely different job. They just have to
literally the
log
only
onto their
thing
laptop.
Literally the only thing they need to do is get a new password.
Yeah.
So this is a business problem. It's not just a, gosh, wouldn't it be nice to feel more connected to my people problem. It's a legit business problem. And I think the experience, I mean, if it takes 40 days to become onboarded, and by onboarded, I'm going to guess they mean doing the productive work for which you were hired.
Yeah. Feeling like they belong there. They're not just here.
And probably 2 parts, right? Feeling like they belong and actually doing the work that you were hired to do.
Right.
Right? That you're not just doing busy work, that you're not just, I mean, one of the things that makes me crazy about traditional onboarding, and this is true of in-person as well, is why do we spend the first 3 days that we are hired filling out paperwork?
That's fair.
Right? I have to fill out the paperwork so that by the end of the week, hopefully I have my computer and my login access and all of that stuff. Why isn't that waiting for me day one?
Yeah. Or even potentially filled out before then if you're able to.
Well, this is what I'm saying is, I know that I start work Monday. How about I get you the paperwork before then?
Yeah.
And I know that there are issues. If I'm filling out paperwork, I'm technically working and I should be paid. And there's stuff, but come on.
Yeah.
The fact that we spend so much of the onboarding process, and when we're in the office and we're dealing with people and we're sitting in the cube farm and we're kind of kibitzing with people and meeting people and putting faces to names, it's not entirely wasted time.
Right.
But then how do you do that?
Yeah. So
right, how do you replicate that experience when you aren't in the office?
Right.
And I think that it's an important question. I think it depends on where you are relative to the office, right? If you can go in for a couple of days, your first couple of days, I think that is an optimum experience.
Absolutely.
If you are in Guam,
you're not going to be able to do that as easily.
You're not going to be able to do that in a way that makes sense. So how do you do now? We have, and if you have heard us talk about this, forgive me, dear listener. But this is a best practice that we do that I think is really, really critical.
Mhm.
When somebody joins our organization, their first assignment, this is an assignment, this is stuff they are expected to do day 1, 2, 3, is to set up a half-hour webcam conversation with every member of the team, whether they're going to work with that person all the time or not, right? They may very rarely work with Lisa in payables or Angie behind the scenes, but a half-hour webcam conversation, and it starts with, what's your job? What do you do here?
Yeah.
Right. But it turns into, where'd you go to school? And do you have kids? And what's on that shelf behind you? And,
And it's meant to not be mostly work. I mean, yeah, you're going to talk a little bit about that, but it's really meant to be, I'm trying to get to know you as a person. I'm trying to find commonalities so that way we can build rapport.
And these conversations should happen spontaneously if you are in the office with people. Now, to be fair, they honestly don't, because a lot of us are introverts, or we don't want to bother somebody, and we're not going to schedule time with somebody at the next desk to say, give me a half hour and let me pick your brain, right?
Right.
But that's a best practice, because it doesn't matter where those people are. You're not just hanging out in the lunchroom with the people in the office.
Right.
So that is and it needs to happen right away, like the first couple of days, right? First of all, what else are you doing anyway? You haven't really been trained to do anything yet, but make that useful time. The other thing that people report with onboarding remotely is there's a lot of time. I meet with my manager. The manager does their best to have one-on-ones and give them lots of time and stuff, but they're not always available. They are doing other things and helping other employees and whatever. And so the amount of wasted time,
right,
those first few days, is really frustrating to people. They want to do work. They don't want to, well, I had a call with my boss at 1 and I've got training at 3, and what do I do in the meantime?
So on that same lines, I know that recently we had an episode where we talked a lot about asynchronous video, and we talked about that in the context of meetings. But to your point about this whole scheduling time and all that, would you recommend asynchronous video onboarding, at least for part of the process?
I think where it makes sense, I think that's absolutely true. And a lot of organizations have training, right? E-learning and stuff. It doesn't have to be that formal.
So it's great when you can do that, right? When you have all the schmancy e-learning
and your IT department has time to build it for you.
And your IT department has time to build that for you and all that stuff. I think that short asynchronous messages, just to start the day. Hey, Marisa, today I want you doing this, right? And it's not an email. It's just, hey, how you doing? Hope you had a great night. Listen, today we're going to work on this. I want you to contact Alice this morning, and I want you to talk to so-and-so this afternoon and talk to them about this function, or get them to show you how they do X.
That all makes sense.
It's informal, it's casual, it's useful, right? You're still getting some degree of face and voice time with the person, and it's personalized.
Right. Yeah, it's way better than just a Slack message.
And I think if we think about the way we've traditionally onboarded, it doesn't really work anyway. I mean, think about the way we used to start jobs, especially at big companies. It's your first day, and so you go to boot camp, and you and 8 other new hires fly to wherever the headquarters is, and you're in class all day, and then you go out for dinner at night, and you do that lather, rinse, repeat, and it's at least 4 days and sometimes 2 weeks, and the amount that you remember is 0.
Yeah, I will admit I've never had that experience. And now I'm very thankful that I have not.
If you join an organization as a new salesperson, especially straight out of school or new in your career, odds are that you have had to go to boot camp. And the fact of the matter is the human brain doesn't absorb information that way.
Right.
Yes, you socialize, right? First of all,
course.
you create a cohort with your fellow learners, and those relationships can very often last throughout your time at the company.
Right. And those are very
Because
important.
there are no atheists in foxholes, and you bond in times of extreme stress.
Right.
But in terms of 2 weeks of constant training, here's your handbook, turn to page 8, you actually retain very little of it.
Mhm.
And at least in the old days, you used to get a binder, and you could go back and refer to the document in the binder and find, how do I do that again? We don't get binders anymore.
Okay, so
We
speaking
get
of that,
access to online.
yeah. So I know that, like you said, we don't do the binder thing anymore. But I know that there are some companies that they've created online employee handbooks or user guides or whatever you want to call it.
And they are usually impossible to navigate.
Okay.
The information, this is where AI, he says, referring to an earlier conversation that we had, this is where AI becomes helpful.
That makes sense.
Because at least in a binder, I can lick my finger and start flipping pages to find what I need.
Okay.
Online, if I don't know exactly what that thing is called, I am scrolling forever. Whereas if the AI can say, hey, show me how to do X, boom, there it is, and you're good. So if you're going to have online onboarding, if you're going to have employee handbooks electronically, they need to be searchable and they need to make some sort of logical sense.
And that makes sense. I know that there's some companies, they use Notion for this. Some of them create a wiki or things like that. So, I mean,
even OneNote can be incredibly helpful. But the other thing is, it's just this 2 weeks of whatever. And there's this lovely thing that I've talked about for years, but I don't think we've ever talked about it on the show, which is the Herrera limit.
Okay.
Which is, the term is a big rabbit hole, literally, because it's stolen from the book Watership Down. But basically, the Herrera limit is how much you can take into your brain before it's full.
Right.
And you can't, and if you've ever been to a training class, this is usually about 11 o'clock on day one. You have absorbed all the stuff you can absorb. And it's not that you don't want to be a good soldier and you don't want to learn it. You just don't get a chance to use it and process it and move it from short-term memory to long-term memory to make room for more stuff, let alone a week or 2 weeks of this nonsense.
Yeah, you'll remember the first things you learned and the last things you learned, and you won't remember a lot of the in-between.
Exactly right. And so one of the things that we are learning about onboarding is, yes, some things are best done in the office. Well, if you're going to be in a hybrid environment, be prepared to spend some time in the office. Even if you're mostly going to be working from home, suck it up, take a day, 2 days, do what you need to do. But a lot of it can be learned in chunks, and it can be learned in chunks from different sources. Traditionally at onboarding, Marisa's been here forever. I'm going to bolt the new person to Marisa, and she's going to follow her around like a little duckling and imprint on her. And that's how she's going to learn. And she's going to learn all of Marisa's good habits, and she's going to pick up all of Marisa's bad habits. And Marisa's not going to get a darn thing done.
Right.
While this is going on, but helpful for knowing where the bathroom is and who's responsible for the coffee, and
and having a buddy in the office, like that's
and having somebody that you're assigned to. Online virtual team collaboration and onboarding should be the same, but you can pick different people for different functions so that you're not, Marisa isn't the only human in the world that this person knows.
Right.
Alice is our resident expert on Excel. And Bob has been here a really long time. And you know what? I want you to take an hour with Bob and just get the history of the company. Mm-hmm. Pick up what did he know? What does he know about the culture? That seems like a strange thing to assign. It's the kind of thing that we think happens organically in person,
And it does not.
but it does not. And if you wait for it to happen organically, it's not going to happen as quickly or perhaps as well.
So, going along the same lines of, there's a point where there's too much information for us to grasp, and
Right.
maybe employee handbooks aren't the right thing, or user guides, or I know for us, and I'm sure this is true for many companies, we have acronyms and initialisms, and we have these words that nobody uses except for us. Like, how do you onboard somebody into that? How do you help them find that? I know that we as a company, we keep realizing we've had two people who onboarded 2 years ago now, and they've been with us and everything's great, and every now and then they ask a question that for us we think, well, duh, it's XYZ, and then we have to remember they don't know this, or they never asked, so it never came up.
Again, AI would be a beautiful thing, right?
Right.
They're on a meeting and we're all talking about the LDL series and blah, blah, blah. And they can go on and go, what in the name of everything that's holy is the LDL series?
Right.
And they can get the answer without looking like idiots.
Okay.
Right?
Fair.
This is where now, so some of this is information gathering, right? But the other thing is, are there tasks that they can and should be doing? That they can't do their entire job, but they can start to go through their lead lists. They can start to compile a list of questions. There are things that they can do so that as soon as possible, they are doing some valuable work and adding value to the team.
Well, and it sounds like too, there's a responsibility for the people who have been working there for a while to inform the new people about things, and there's a responsibility of the new person to ask questions too. Now, granted, I realize if they can't ask what they don't know, but there's also stuff that they can ask.
But it's funny when you talk about company culture and company handbooks and that kind of thing. There's explicit knowledge and there's tacit knowledge.
Okay.
Explicit knowledge is stuff that's on the page. If you want to know how to do X, go to this website, turn to this page. There is a process for this.
Right.
If I'm working and I have a question, well, everybody knows Alice is the Excel wizard. Where does it say that? Where does it say if I have an Excel question, I have to go to Alice? Because I'm going to Marisa because she's the only person I know. And Marisa is completely useless when it comes to Excel.
Right. Well, which also means that I need to be really good about saying I'm not the Excel expert. Alice is.
Exactly right. So one of the things that's helpful is if you have people with specific knowledge or skill sets, get them involved early, particularly if they are remote from each other, because I might be unwilling to reach out to Marisa with a question. But if that's Marisa's job, and Marisa knows that I am
the keeper of the email. You have to talk to me at some point.
Right? Two things are going to happen. One is that I feel less resistance to reaching out to Marisa because I know that. And the other thing is Marisa might be a little more proactive about checking in with me about how I'm doing with that thing, because that's the piece of knowledge that Marisa is responsible for. Right. And this all sounds very complicated, but it really is critical to getting people on board. I mean, we talk about, well, people need to be comfortable and how do they do that? Exposure to the people on their team, getting to know them socially, developing trust very quickly, doing meaningful work and demonstrating that you can do meaningful work, right? Maybe what this person needs is to be invited to a couple of meetings that they are completely unqualified to be in.
That's fair.
But they might have an idea, right? Hey, at my old company, we did this. And they'll hear the acronyms flying around and they'll hear how we work together. So parceling out their day and figuring out when they do actual work, when can other people be involved in this so that we are creating the social networks and the bonds and the relationships, and then what useless work can we eliminate? Right. So they're not spending 5 days filling out forms before they even talk to another human being. That will go a long way to making the onboarding process more pleasant, more useful, and more consistent with the way we're working.
That totally makes sense. And unfortunately, we are out of time. I know that we could probably continue to talk about this for much longer than this, but I want to thank Katrina and Rachel for sending in your suggestion about talking about onboarding, because I think this was a really important conversation. And I'm sure this is not the only time that we're going to talk about onboarding in the future. And thank you so much for listening to the Long Distance Work Life. For show notes, transcripts, and other resources, make sure to visit longdistanceworklife.com. If you haven't yet, subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss any future episodes. And while you're there, be sure to like and review. This helps us know what you love about our show. Feel free to contact us via email or LinkedIn with the links in our show notes and let us know you listened to this episode or suggest a topic for Wayne and I to tackle in a future episode. We'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to learn more about remote teams, order Wayne and Kevin Eikenberry's new book, The Long Distance Team. You can learn more about the book at longdistanceteambook.com. Thanks for joining us. And as Wayne likes to say, don't let the weasels get you down.